There's a reason manifestation feels like a roller coaster for most people. One day it's working, and the next it's like the universe forgot they even existed. They try everything, visualizing harder, repeating more affirmations, scripting late at night, watching all the tutorials and mindset coaches, and for a moment it gives hope. But then it all slips away again. Nothing sticks, nothing stays. And what most people never realize is that it was never the technique that was broken. It was the identity underneath it that didn't change. That's the part no one talks about enough. Because as long as someone is using techniques to get something they still believe they don't already have, they're reinforcing the story that it's missing. And when the inner self still feels like someone who's not enough, not worthy, not chosen, not safe, then even when something good does show up, it never lasts. Because the outside can only reflect what's normal on the inside. That's the real secret. Manifestation doesn't happen from effort, it happens from alignment. And alignment isn't about doing more. It's about being someone new. Someone for whom the desire isn't a stretch. Someone for whom the desire feels expected. Not because of ego, not because of delusion, but because there's no longer a war between what's wanted and what's believed to be true. The hardest pill to swallow is this: desires don't manifest because they're wanted badly enough. They manifest because they match the self-image that's already accepted. And that self-image is what truly runs the show. It's what decides what's possible, what's allowed, what's normal, and what's real. That's why repeating things alone doesn't change much. Because if those words don't match the internal identity, the body rejects it, the mind doubts it, and the nervous system goes right back to the familiar. And familiar always wins. So no matter how many techniques are done, if they're coming from the version of self that still feels not good enough, the energy behind it will push the desire away. But the second that identity starts to shift, when the self-concept starts saying, "This is who I am now," everything else begins to move too. Because manifestation isn't about getting. It's about becoming. It was never about chasing something out there. It was always about remembering what's already within and choosing to live from that place. The techniques aren't useless, but they're only powerful when they're coming from a foundation that's already been reprogrammed. That foundation is self-concept. And once that changes, reality doesn't have a choice, it has to follow. It's one of those truths that stings at first but heals everything in the long run. Most people spend their entire lives going after what they want, thinking that the wanting itself is what will bring it closer. But that's not how it works. The universe isn't responding to desire. It's responding to identity. It's responding to what's accepted as true, normal, and expected. That means what shows up is always a reflection of what's been assumed to be real, not what's been wished for. That's why it's possible to want something deeply but still not receive it. Because underneath the wanting is a silent story that says, "This isn't who I am," or "I'm not the kind of person this happens for," or "It's too far away." And as long as that identity stays the same, the reality doesn't change either. It can't, because it's locked in by the self-concept that keeps choosing the same emotional baseline, the same thoughts, the same reactions, and the same patterns. Self-concept is like a thermostat. No matter how high the desire is turned up, the internal temperature will pull it back down if it doesn't match the setting. And that setting gets shaped by years of repetition. Old beliefs, past experiences, the way others treated you, the way you talked to yourself during hard times. Over time, those little impressions form a full identity. And that identity becomes the filter through which life is seen and felt. Even if something amazing tries to come in, it gets filtered out if it doesn't match what's already believed. That's why nothing really shifts until the self-concept does. Because that's the part that tells reality how to treat you. It's not enough to want love if deep down the identity says, "I'm not lovable." It's not enough to want abundance if the identity is stuck in lack. And it's not enough to say affirmations if the one saying them still feels like a fraud. But the beauty of this is, it's not permanent. The identity isn't set in stone. It's made up of thoughts that were accepted again and again. And just like it was built, it can be rebuilt. Slowly, gently, intentionally. That's how transformation begins. Not by forcing the outside to shift, but by quietly becoming someone new inside. Someone who doesn't have to beg reality anymore, because what they want already feels like home. And when something feels like home, it arrives fast, it stays longer, and it doesn't feel like a struggle to keep. Because now, it's aligned with who you are, not just what you want. There's something strange about assumptions. They don't feel like beliefs, they feel like facts. And that's what makes them so powerful. Most people go through life not realizing that they're assuming things all day long. Assumptions like, "This always happens to me," or "People never stay," or "Money's hard to come by," aren't just thoughts, they're silent agreements with a certain version of life. And once those assumptions settle in, the mind stops questioning them. The world starts to reflect them. That's why it feels like certain patterns just keep repeating, no matter what's done to change them. It's not always because of actions, it's because of the assumptions guiding those actions. And until those invisible assumptions shift, the outside world keeps following the same script. What makes this even more intense is how subtle it is. No one wakes up and says out loud, "I assume I'm unworthy," or "I assume things won't work out for me." But the body remembers, the nervous system reacts, the energy shifts, and reality responds. So even when someone tries to believe something new, if the old assumption still feels more familiar, more safe, or more true, then the new story won't stick. It's not that the new belief is wrong, it's just not embodied yet. And the universe isn't reacting to surface-level thoughts, it's reacting to the deeper emotional blueprint. That's where self-concept lives, in those automatic reactions, in what feels normal, in what's expected even without trying. This is why people feel like they're doing all the right things but still getting the same old outcomes. Because the doing isn't the issue, it's the being. It's who someone becomes in their quiet moments, in their day-to-day thoughts, in the stories they tell themselves when no one's watching. That's what creates the field that manifestation grows from. And if that field is filled with doubt, fear, or unworthiness, then even the strongest desire can't fully bloom. But the moment an assumption shifts, even slightly, everything else starts to adjust too. That doesn't always mean instant results, but it does mean instant alignment. And once that alignment starts, momentum builds. Life begins to feel easier, because it's no longer working against the old story. It's finally flowing with the new one. And the truth is, assumptions can be rewritten. They don't have to come from the past. They can come from vision, from intention, from choice. But it has to be real. It can't just be words spoken once a day. It has to feel lived, breathed, and trusted. That's what transforms a simple thought into a foundation. And when the foundation shifts, so does the whole house. This is the core of self-concept work. Not changing the outer world, but changing the lens that sees it. Because the lens doesn't just shape how things look, it shapes what shows up at all. And the clearer that lens becomes, the easier it is for life to reflect something new. What's wild about reality is that it doesn't give people what they beg for, it gives them what feels normal. And that one truth is the reason so many desires feel stuck just out of reach. Because if something feels too good to be true, too big, too unfamiliar, then even while chasing it, the deeper self is pushing it away. Not because it's unwanted, but because it doesn't match the emotional baseline that's been accepted for years. That baseline is self-concept. It decides what's comfortable, what's expected, what's just how life is. And until that baseline shifts, everything else stays the same, no matter how badly something else is wanted. It's not just about thoughts, it's about familiarity. If someone spent years living in disappointment, that becomes familiar. If they've always felt rejected or overlooked, that becomes their emotional home. So when something better starts to show up, love, support, abundance, peace, it can feel like a threat. Not because it actually is, but because it's foreign. The nervous system doesn't trust it yet. And what the nervous system doesn't trust, it resists. That's how people end up sabotaging good things without realizing it. Not because they're broken or unworthy, but because the new thing doesn't match the inner thermostat that's been set. And no matter how much effort is made to keep it, it slips away unless the self-concept rises to meet it. This is why doing mindset work on the surface level only goes so far. Saying new things doesn't work if deep down the old version still feels more real. The subconscious isn't listening to the volume of the affirmation, it's listening to the emotion underneath it. So if someone's saying, "I'm chosen," but still feeling like a burden, then the old self-concept is still running the show. That doesn't mean it can't change. It just means it takes more than words. It takes consistency. It takes awareness. And more than anything, it takes a willingness to leave behind what used to feel normal, even if it felt safe. Because here's the paradox. Growth often feels uncomfortable not because something's wrong, but because it's new. And healing isn't about feeling good all the time. It's about becoming someone for whom goodness feels safe. That's the goal. Not just to manifest something amazing once, but to feel like it's natural to have it, like it belongs, like it fits. That only happens when the self-concept starts matching the life that's being imagined. That's when things click. That's when the outside finally starts to make sense with what's going on inside. And that's when reality begins to mirror back a new kind of normal. One that doesn't have to be forced or maintained through fear, because it's no longer something being chased. It's simply who someone is now. And once that shift happens, nothing's the same again. There's something really frustrating about doing everything right and still watching reality stay the same. It feels like a personal failure, like something must be broken, or worse, that maybe the whole idea of manifestation was a lie. But the truth is much simpler and way more freeing. Manifestation isn't just about desire. It's not even about belief at the surface level. It's about the structure underneath, the foundation. And that foundation is self-concept. Without it, all the visualizing and affirming and scripting becomes exhausting. Because it's being done from a place that still doesn't believe the desire is safe to receive. That's why it never sticks. That's why it doesn't feel natural to hold. That's why it always slips away or never fully arrives. Imagine building a house on sand. The plans can be perfect, the paint color beautiful, the furniture expensive, but if the ground underneath it is unstable, it all collapses. That's what it's like to manifest from a weak self-concept. The techniques might be solid, the intentions might be strong, but if the person doing them still feels like someone who doesn't deserve it, or who always gets left out, or who's used to disappointment, then no amount of outer effort can override that inner instability. And that's not a flaw. That's just how the mind works. It always looks for what's familiar. It always tries to return to what feels safe, even if that safety is wrapped in lack, chaos, or struggle. This is why manifestation often feels like a cycle of short highs and long lows. Because when something finally starts to work, it creates a little burst of hope. Things feel exciting again. But if the identity underneath hasn't changed, the mind slowly starts to sabotage it without even meaning to. It questions everything. It looks for proof that it's not going to last. It finds ways to bring things back to what it knows. And before long, the results vanish. Not because the desire was too big, but because the version of self it belonged to hadn't been fully claimed yet. This is where the real shift happens. Not by doing more, but by going deeper. By asking, who would I be if this was already mine? And then actually stepping into that version in everyday life. Not perfectly, not overnight, but consistently, with patience, with gentleness. That's what rewrites the foundation. That's what turns sand into solid ground. Because once the identity starts saying, this is just who I am now, the outer world has no choice but to catch up. And when it does, it won't feel like a surprise, it'll feel like a match. Not because it was forced, but because it was aligned. So the next time something isn't manifesting, the question isn't, what technique should I try? It's, what identity am I doing it from? That question alone can collapse years of frustration. Because when the inner foundation is strong, the rest builds itself. So if things haven't been showing up the way they were supposed to, it's not because it's not working. It's because it's trying to remind you that who you are being matters more than anything you're doing. Change the self-concept, and the world around you changes too. That's not a theory, it's the design. When you finally become someone who expects better, receives more, and feels safe being fully seen, life can't help but reflect it right back. If this hit something deep for you, drop a comment below and share what part really clicked. Your words might be the thing someone else needed to hear today.